Hi everyone, welcome to the second episode of Time Extend Racing Game Podcast. My name is Adam Ismail and I'm here with...
Brendan Rorison, and today we'll be looking at a range of game news topics and also a feature topic at the end.
Right, and our first episode was very heavily focused on arcade games and retro games, but this couldn't be farther from that because we'll start right off the top with the news. A lot of Gran Turismo Sport news in the past 2 weeks, and some Forza thrown in as well, and iRacing of all things. But we'll start with Gran Turismo. A couple days ago, we got the 1.11 update, which came with a selection of cars, a new track in the form of Monza, a few new configurations of the Lake Maggiore circuit, and new GT League events. And I think that this update basically, continues the theme that kicked off with the first major update, that we're going to see, maybe like 9 to 10 cars and a new track here and there, new configurations, and they're not really going to stray too much from that. In the form of the GT League events we got, there were 3. One was a Ford Raptor event, the other one was a Ferrari Focus event, and then a Japanese sports car event. Oh, there was also the Group 3 Endurance Series as well, so there are actually 4 events. But something I think that is important to note about this update is the selection of cars. We got a Dodge Viper from 2002, the 67 Ferrari 330 P4, the 66 Jaguar XJ13, so the 2 old Le Mans cars that we got in GT5 and GT6, the 06 Ford GT, the 76 Ferrari 512 BB, the Diablo GT, McLaren F1, Toyota 2000 GT, Toyota FT1, and Supra RZ. Those are a lot of old cars.
Yeah, definitely. When I seen the initial list, it seemed like a kind of a Gran Turismo 3 All-Stars featuring some GT5 favourites as well. Just when you seen the Dodge Viper in there and a premium Toyota Supra RS, can you believe it? We finally got one in Gran Turismo.
Yeah, we can really stop the conversation right there and move on, because the Supra RZ is really what anyone cares about. After so long, of waiting for a premium Supra in GT5 and GT6, and they never gave it to us for some strange reason, even though it's one of the hallmarks of the series, we finally get one now. It's sublime to drive. But for me, kind of the issue is that this is really the only new car in this package. The rest of these cars all appear in previous Gran Turismo games, which is fine. I think Polyphony is trying to make it on the fact that GT Sport launched with a very current and very newish focused car roster, and they're trying to bring it back to the older cars, which I definitely appreciate. But I'd like to see more originality here instead of the premiums that we've already had access to for 10 years.
Yeah, definitely. I do agree with that. I mean, when I took the new Supra out for a run on the Monza course, I don't know why, but it just felt more distinctly like a Gran Turismo game at that point. All these older cars are just pretty much hallmarks of the series at this point, so getting them in sport is great, but I know what you mean. It isn't really much in terms of new content. I mean, even the 2 Le Mans racers are really cool, but what will they add in terms of what GT Sport is? Not too much. So I think it's a bit more fan service from Polyphony getting the ball rolling before they hopefully start looking at more sport-inspired updates as well.
Right, and we can't deny that these are also fan favorites too,
Yeah.
They might be cars that we've seen before, but obviously no one's going to complain about the Supra. No one is going to complain about the old Viper, especially the McLaren F1. I think there's a bit of an issue in the form of the Le Mans cars that are there, the Ferrari and the Jaguar, are people very, very quickly discover they're 20 million credits.
Oof, yeah.
Which means there's going to be a lot of grinding. There's going to be a lot of grinding.
Yeah, and with the 20 million credit cars topic, I don't want to bog the podcast down, but I understand why they're there and understand why they're so expensive, but I don't think sport has a meaningful enough way of earning credits yet to justify them being that expensive. Like in older games, I accepted the fact some cars playing out couldn't be purchased because that was the way the game was designed. But I mean, I've played the GT Sport for about 55 hours so far and earned 8 million credits, so I couldn't even ask to have half of one of those cars as it stands. So maybe it's a bit of jealousy on my part, but I'd like to see Polyphony find a way of giving us a better way to earn credits that doesn't break the economy, because I think that's the juggling act we've got here. A heavily focused online racing game with cars that cost the most expensive in the game but aren't actually used in the mainstream for sport mode and that type of thing.
Yeah, and I don't have a problem with these cars being more expensive and being on that pedestal, but I do have an issue if the economy isn't built to support these cars, and that is a delicate balance that, as you say, they have to negotiate. 10 million credits probably would have been fine. Why we need to go to 20, I'm not really sure. And the other thing is that I don't think these cars justify it. As we're saying, we've had access to them for a while, and I don't know, they're just kind of old hat at this point, I guess. And you can drive, the 330 has appeared in Forza and has appeared in other games too, so I don't know. If it was something a little more exclusive, if it was a 917, for example, which obviously has appeared in many other racing games at this point, but it's new to Gran Turismo, and obviously a 917 is a legendary car, I feel like it would have gone down differently.
Yeah, definitely. For a lot of people, these cars are old hat, so nobody's going to be rushing out to try them. What I'm interested in, though, is the two Le Mans racers. It seems like the Ford GT40 Mark IV was dropped from GT5. Because I always remember in that game, there was those three racers, the Jaguar, the Ferrari, and the Ford, and they were used prominently in promotional materials, but the Ford seems to be either dropped or coming at a later date. It was just funny because Polyphony put out some screenshots showing the content, and no joke, they've got a screenshot in the exact same layout as the original one that showed the Ford, Jaguar and Ferrari, but this time it's the Jaguar, Ferrari and the 512BB.
Yeah. It's hilarious because they put out a tweet that said, "Where are you driving this weekend?" And I said, well, not much of a choice, is there? So.
Well, unless you've got 20 million credits.
Exactly. Yeah, and, the cars are what they are. The tracks, I think no one will complain about the new Maggiore configurations because, at least in my opinion, that is the best new original track that they've put in Gran Turismo Sport. Dragon Trail is very good as well, but Maggiore, I think, I find Maggiore to be just perfect. And if you can divide it up between these individual segments that are smaller, it makes that track more conducive to lower power races and slower cars as well. So I love seeing Maggiore there. Monza, I posed a question on Twitter last week. Does anyone really like Monza? Let's be honest.
Yeah, it's a historical circuit, which is the go-to term for trying to make it sound relevant.
Yeah, that's pretty much what it comes down to, is a history, right?
Exactly. It's a pretty boring track, but I'd like to stress the pretty part because in GT Sport it looks fantastic. But yeah, I mean, the actual racing on it has never really been that exciting in a video game form. I mean, I imagine going those speeds in real life is terrifying on those straights, but in a game like Gran Turismo that doesn't really prioritise the sense of speed that much, it's just pretty much, if it ever gets used in sport mode races, us praying and hoping that nobody crashes us out on those big straights, because let's be honest, that's where you find most of the dicks in the game. You're going fast like that.
It's not the kind of track that's going to prioritize very slow and methodical and careful driving in racecraft. Yeah. You're gonna run into some punters. But that's pretty much the update in a nutshell. I did want to move on quickly. Well, right before we get off of GT Sport, some breaking news pretty much at the time that we're recording this is that there was recently a interview with Kazunori Yamauchi that emerged from the Taipei Games Show from a Japanese outlet, Game Watch. And as usual in these interviews, Kaz was very tempered and just, didn't, I won't say, straight out vague, but he was careful about the way he presented, what Polyphony's working on in the future, as he always is. We have some mentions of GT7 in there. I think it's interesting that after saying, GT Sport may as well be GT7, he's kind of walked that back and said, you can look for that feature in GT7. You can look forward to GT7. We're always working on the next thing, and that next thing seems to be GT7. So maybe Sport is more of a stopgap than he led on in the beginning.
Yeah, it's possible. I mean, we know the way Kazunori tends to talk about the Gran Turismo games that he brings out. He's very proud of every one of his team's achievements. So, in one way, I'm not surprised that he was trying to paint it initially as Gran Turismo 7, but I'm sure him and his team have a lot of ideas they'd love to implement in a less structured environment as well. Like, I believe, cosmetic customization, for example. Doesn't look as if that will come to sport, but you can imagine in GT7 that's something that the team might want to look quite heavily into because they've got a more structure-free environment, more traditional game-like game, you could say.
Right, and that's the main thing, that the customization is the main thing that kind of tipped off the GT Sport versus GT7 conversation, because they asked him a question like, can gamers expect that? And he was like, that's more of a GT7 feature. The next main entry in the franchise will probably deliver on that. So, I'm not surprised to see that. We'll get a lot more. We'll get cars that we maybe don't expect, and we'll get tracks that we maybe don't expect, but that's a whole facet of gameplay that I think GT Sport made very clear off the bat we're not going to see.
Yeah.
The thing that is most interesting to me is that they asked him a question about Tourist Trophy, and it's really difficult to get a handle on what exactly Kaz said, because we don't have an accurate translation at this time, because the entire interview was conducted in Japanese. Also, DualShockers put out a report on it, but even their report isn't, translated in the best possible way. So it seems like, from what I can tell, from a combination of that article and also Google Translate, that Kaz is very much aware of the desire for a new Tourist Trophy. He's thinking about it, but they're not necessarily working on it, which, I mean, that's something that we've been hearing pretty much. That story we've heard since the Gran Turismo 5 days, GT6 even.
Yeah, I mean, some outlets might run it as soft confirmation of Tourist Trophy existing in some form or another, but we know the way Kaz works. He doesn't like shutting doors, put it that way. So the fact that he keeps saying that Tourist Trophy is on his mind gives us hope that one day it might happen. But with these lengthy production cycles that we're dealing with now, I mean, maybe it's more likely that the bikes could show up in a GT7 at some point down the line or something like that, because a full game on Polyphony shoulders that isn't the Gran Turismo franchise would probably take up a lot of time. And I think it would still sell well, but maybe Sony wouldn't be on board with the project.
I feel like that's the answer. If they're going to get bikes into Gran Turismo in a way, or rather, if they're going to release a bike game, the best way to do it would be to put bikes in Gran Turismo, because Kaz keeps saying, we've heard for 20 years that the second that work on the current GT game ends, he moves on to the next one. Well, if you're going GT1, GT2, GT, there's not much room in there for Tourist Trophy, is there?
Exactly.
So
you could just do
I personally
what
would love to see it.
Basically. Like what Drive Club did with Drive Club Bikes, even though the name doesn't really lend itself to a bikes expansion being called Drive Club. It still worked with that expansion, and having that as like a separate experience almost from within the game. So who knows? Maybe by the time Gran Turismo 7 releases, we might get something similar.
Yeah, I think that would be the best way for them to do it. So that's pretty much the Gran Turismo news. We'll quickly mention, we record these every 2 weeks, so this one goes back a little while. But if we're going to talk about GT Sports Update, we may as well talk about Forza 7's DLC, which came out around 2 weeks ago, almost 2 weeks ago. It is the Totino's car pack, which I put in our podcast note. Totino's, really? Do you guys have Totino's in Scotland, Brendan?
They do not. I only know them from memes, basically.
Yeah. They're these, they're pizza rolls. They're basically like mini calzones.
Right.
They have like, sauce and cheese and everything in there. And I mean, they're tasty, but they're also like one of those things, if you eat too many of them, it builds and it just all starts to taste like plastic.
So for some reason a natural fit for a Forza car pack then. We'll not question their logic behind it, but I guess racing drivers like Totino's.
Well, maybe it's that it's really hard to eat pizza behind the wheel, but Totino's are compact and, easier to just grasp and pop in your mouth. They're also incredibly, if you have one and they're really hot, they'll just burn your mouth because all of the heat is trapped within. So we'll be starting another podcast all about Totino's pizza rolls in the future, but right now we're going to focus on this one. So the cars in this update, or in this DLC rather, we got the number 24 BMW M6, the GTLM car from Rahal Lehrman Racing. We got the Citroen 2CV, the Lotus Elise GT1, the Nissan R380 93 Porsche 911 Turbo S, the Subaru 360, and the Volkswagen Type 3 1600. Now, this is a typical Forza DLC, I guess, in the form of all of these cars are very different. They kind of... Yeah. It seems like Turn 10 likes to just hit every single, basically strata of what a Forza gamer would want. Although, I have noticed that there is not an American car in this pack. Which is interesting.
Well noticed.
They usually throw... Yeah, they usually throw a little muscle in there, just for people who want that. But I also have to give them credit because they always manage to find a way of throwing in these cars that other games don't have that I find very special. And I should have done a little bit more research because unfortunately I haven't played the Forza game since Forza 6, and I didn't really buy the DLC that much when I had Forza 6. So I'm not exactly sure if these cars were in the game or not, or were in the previous Forza, but I really appreciate the Elise GT1 in there. And I think the R380 is really interesting because we know about Nissan's other LMP cars, their other Le Mans cars rather, but going back to 1967 for this prototype that I'm sure a lot of people aren't aware of is pretty cool. And I like that they just keep digging up cars like that to throw into Forza.
Yeah, it reminds me of why we know most of these old LMP cars in the first place, Gran Turismo, having them as part of the car roster, and if Forza wants to continue that lineage by introducing even more unique cars that might have got left behind during the recent games, then I'm all for it. Even things like the Citroen 2CV. I mean, I'm sure it'll annoy some people that it isn't the latest hypercar, but I mean, first and foremost, Forza still wants to be that car PG type game that Gran Turismo used to be before sport, so I'm all for these inclusions. But if you bought the car pass hoping for a bunch of new hypercars, then I guess you're entitled to be a bit annoyed.
Yeah, and as much as I enjoy those two cars, the Elise GT1 is huge for me because I remember that car from... I believe it was Need for Speed 2, and it used to appear in a lot of those old, Need for Speed style games, arcade racers, and so that's a car I always enjoyed. But yeah, I really don't understand why developers keep putting cars like the 2CV and the Subaru 360 in these games. Like, it just, from the efficiency standpoint, or from the standpoint of like, they're working on cars that gamers actually want, or that they'll actually get some sort of use and play out of, especially online. I just don't see it. I don't think there's going to be a lot of 2CV or 360 one-make races online, and the ones that are there, those cars, I'm all for like slow cars and just doing like really quick fun races. Like Gran Turismo Sport has had a couple, like BMW i3 events around like the East version of Suzuka, and that's great and that's fun. But these cars are considerably slower than that. So that's crossing the line, I think.
Putting in a premium DLC pack is maybe a no-no. I mean, like you said, the actual use these cars will see probably isn't that much. I like having them in the game, but I'm not sure that putting it in a pack with cars like the Lotus Elise GT1, for example, is the best way to do it, because although it makes it a variety, it's still at least two cars most people probably won't drive.
Yeah, and I should also add that the Detroit Auto Show was at the beginning of January, and so to coincide with that, Turn 10 gave us the 2019 Veloster Turbo and Veloster N. And I wanted to throw this in there because actually I have a friend who owns a Veloster Turbo, and he's very excited about the Veloster N. The Veloster N actually looks like a pretty nice car.
Yeah.
So, it's one of those things that Hyundai has had these N models, or they've started to release these N models in other parts of the world, but we haven't gotten any of them in the US yet. I believe there's the i30N in Europe.
Yes,
we don't get that car, but we will get the Veloster N, and it looks pretty good. So that's a freebie that we can all enjoy.
Yeah, it's good as well. I like those type of tie-ins. I mean, it doesn't really suit GT Sports Mantra to go for those types of thing anymore, so I'm glad to see Forza might be picking up that mantle and introducing some new cars as they're revealed.
Right, and who's going to complain about free cars, especially free brand new cars?
Yep.
So the final news topic that I want to talk about this week is some interesting iRacing news. They have announced that iRacing will get AI competitors and a single-player mode in 2018. Now, if you know anything about iRacing, this is going to be, or this is a shock to the system. This is not something that I think iRacing gamers or iRacing players, because it's probably the simulator you can least describe as a game because of how serious it is. I don't think it's something that they were ready for, but I just want to read off a quote from the company.
Sure.
Having this feature will allow for many opportunities for members and for us to continue to grow. It will allow members to practice in a simulated setting before getting on track with real cars, which is a good thing, especially for people new to sim racing. It will also allow for a more relaxed and fun format, which will be a welcome addition from time to time, even for hardcore members. Now you don't need to go to another racing game for AI. It will bring in many new members who will use it as a stepping stone to head-to-head racing. It allows us to have a much more competitive demo option for potential new customers in various settings like trade shows or even online trials. Now, I don't think you can really argue with many of the points they make there. iRacing is a very serious simulator, and most of the racing happens, pretty much right now until they release this update, all of the racing happens between players online, between actual users. Racecraft is very important. It's more important than iRacing, probably any other sim. So I totally get the value of practicing against the AI to build your racecraft so that you don't make a fool of yourself online or take out other racers.
Yeah, I think the concept is sound. It's good to have that AI in there for the reasons you've mentioned. It just makes me wonder, though, if people will start becoming reluctant to race online till they feel like they're absolutely perfect with their racecraft, and that kind of defeats the learning purpose of iRacing at the same time, because it's not like it's a £40 purchase like most sims where you just pay for it and that's it. iRacing is like a subscription-based service, so what is the likelihood that somebody who's willing to pay a subscription fee will just want to race offline to get their bearings together? I'm willing to bet that the beginner events and stuff they host would be a better place to learn in a real environment. But at the same time, it's good that the option's going to be there. It's not something I think that any of us seen coming, that they would add AI to iRacing, so fair play for them to make that kind of jump.
Yeah, and I have some experience with iRacing. I played iRacing a couple years ago, and fortunately at the time it was a game that you could run on any computer, even like a MacBook Pro, which is what I had, which is not at all a gaming system. I think if there was an online, or rather if there was a single player in AI mode, I would have taken a much longer time to get online. Let's be honest, the iRacing community takes stuff like that more seriously. Everyone pays for this simulator. If you don't know, just to give a little bit of background, iRacing is a PC sim that has a yearly subscription model, as you say, and also it up until recently, I believe they're working on like a local interface, but the entire thing is conducted through your browser, and from there you set up practice events or you go into scheduled races. It is very much, imagine sport mode in Gran Turismo, and that's it, and there's no sense of progression or anything like that. It is, you go online and you race. You can pick any car that you've purchased or any track, and by the way, cars and tracks you have to pay for individually in iRacing. You get a certain amount when you join, but most of them you have to pay for, and they cost, anywhere from like $7 to $12, for example, a pop. So this is a massive investment for people.
Yes.
And because of that, it's something that gets taken very seriously. So there's pros and cons to this. I think the career mode is interesting because while I can see iRacing players getting behind the ability to practice and stuff in single player, I really think that career mode, which in this case they say is just going to be the ability to schedule races for yourself, AI races in succession, it just seems like window dressing. I don't really think the audience is going to want that, and I don't really think it's something that's going to attract a lot of new players.
Yeah, definitely, especially when you consider that subscription model where you have to pay for cars and tracks separate. I mean, there'll be a lot of people who actually just literally buy one class of cars and the tracks that those happen to race on in the online events. So, what does the career mode do for those types of players? Not very much. So, yeah, I think it's a good idea, but like you said, I think it's window dressing just to have that option tucked neatly in the features column when you're considering a subscription. But I don't think it's going to be anything groundbreaking.
Yeah, and I think it's also critical to note where iRacing is at this time. I was talking to one of my friends who is a subscriber, and it's been a while since I played it, but he was telling me it's really exploded in the dirt track community,
Right?
which makes so much sense because iRacing has always supported that from the beginning,
Yeah.
and it handles dirt track racing better than any other game. And partially that's because iRacing is a very sophisticated simulator and it works very well, but that's also because dirt track racing isn't done by any other game. A lot of people, especially where I live in the Northeast, dirt track racing is actually kind of a big part of the local community, and it's an event and lots of people participate. It's a grassroots thing, and if you want to be able to enjoy that digitally as we enjoy our sports car racing or our Formula One or Le Mans or NASCAR or whatever, there's nowhere for you to go, and there really never has been anywhere for you to go. But now iRacing is the first game to really deliver the sim racing experience for people who enjoy dirt track, and that's great. So it'll probably be a big win with that audience.
Yeah, and iRacing is pretty much the agreed upon premium racing sim experience, so it's good in a way that the option that dirt track enthusiasts do have is arguably one of the best.
Yeah. Yes, that pretty much covers the news for this week, and with that we can move on to our feature topic. So this week for our feature topic, we are going to be talking about something quite different from our discussion last week about our favorite rally games. We are going to be talking about basically our online racing history, how we enjoy online racing today, and where we think it's going in the future. What did we play growing up? What sticks out in our minds as a fun or great experience? I wanted to talk about this because you look at GT Sport and the conversation that surrounded GT Sport when the game came out, or well before the game came out, and there were a lot of people who couldn't wrap their heads around it, who wanted the CarPG experience, I guess. And this was the first Gran Turismo game that wasn't going to deliver on that, was focusing more on the online aspect. But you also have people who are kind of sick and tired of the CarPG experience, and I think if you've played a Forza Motorsport game in recent years, no one will deny the quality and the love, care, and attention that Turn 10 puts into those games, but I feel like we are kind of all getting a little bit tired of that progression, and it's human nature to kind of stick with what we know and not venture outside of it. But the second something arrives to challenge our expectations and challenge what we look for in the game and make us do something outside of our comfort zone, it usually is effective. I mean, I've enjoyed sport mode races more than I thought I would, and that's something I think we'll talk about more towards the end. But, we were talking about iRacing in the news. iRacing was a brand new thing when I played it, and I had never played a game that was so intently focused on online racing above anything else. That was the only thing you can do. So I think there's always kind of this push and pull between the market, what we want and what we end up getting, and what our expectations are. And I think online racing is at the center of all of that.
Yeah, I do agree with that as well, especially regarding online racing, because like yourself, when it came to online racing in games, I wasn't overly enthusiastic about it because I've had a mix of experiences, which we can talk about, but sometimes somebody just has to rip the band-aid off, basically, and say, you're going to have to learn to race online, and GT Sport has done that, and so far it's been a positive experience for me.
Yeah, and I'd have to agree. But I guess to kick it off, we'll just start talking about what we played growing up and what our first online experiences are. And mine's a very strange one because I remember, I guess I was 8 years old, and which is ridiculous, but we had the Dreamcast. My brother had the Dreamcast, and he paid for SegaNet, which was the Dreamcast online service that allowed you to play games online, the few games that were supported on the Dreamcast, over a dial-up modem, which is ridiculous that it even supported that. There was an optional broadband adapter for the Dreamcast, but that cost a lot of money, and nobody had broadband back in 2001. So we had our dial-up service, and we were able to play SegaNet and Daytona USA 2001. I believe that was the only racing game on the Dreamcast that supported online in such a way that you could race against other players. Most of the online component of Dreamcast games had to do with leaderboards and stuff because obviously networks really couldn't support it and developers weren't really keen to give it to you. But Daytona 2001 did have that feature. It also came out right at the end of the Dreamcast lifespan, so it was pretty late in the running too. But I played that game. I probably didn't play it online much because I had to ask my brother to go online, and I have to do it. And it probably, when we were online, I guess we couldn't use a phone or something. I'm trying to think back to the way internet used to work back then. It was just such a frustrating experience.
Yeah.
I remember going online and just making an absolute fool of myself because I didn't know how to play anything back in the day, and I didn't know how to especially race against real people without just completely barreling into them. And I don't think I wanted to hit people and punt people and stuff like that, but I didn't know how not to. Yeah. And Daytona 2001's handling model is difficult even if you're a 24-year-old adult. So that didn't make the experience much easier. And I remember they had this rudimentary like text chat system, and some guys like, you should really use the brakes. And as a kid, I'm just like, oh, thanks. I was actually like surprisingly like not an asshole about it. I was like, thanks for the feedback. I'll try to remember to do that in the future. And,
and that's your mantra now. You're playing GT Sport Online. That one guy on Daytona USA that inspired you.
Yeah, inspired me to be a better racer and hone my racecraft. So that's pretty much where it started for me. And then after that, I dabbled in Forza. But I'll let you talk, Brendan, before I go off into my own tangents.
I just have one question for you then, Adam. How busy was the online in a game like Daytona on SegaNet? Because the Dreamcast wasn't a very popular console, and I imagine not many people took the effort to set it up. So do you remember like how busy the online would actually be?
Like I said, I was really young, and I probably didn't even play it more than like 3 times online, but it sticks out in my memory because it's the first online racing experience I ever had, the first online gaming experience I ever had. And I think I'm going to assume it was one of those situations where not many people had Dreamcast, even fewer people had SegaNet, although Sega was at one point basically giving you a Dreamcast for free if you signed up for SegaNet. That was like when they were absolutely at their worst, and they were at death's door in terms of being a hardware manufacturer. Yeah. So I'm going to assume that you had a very small but very vocal and very passionate group of fans who got Daytona USA, had SegaNet, and basically, you would have the same maybe 20 people online doing races all day. Yeah. I'm just going to assume that was the case. I don't actually know. But I didn't spend much time doing it because I was bad, and we didn't really have the resources for me to be online all day gaming anyway. And even besides that, like, it worked over a dial-up modem, and all things considered, it worked pretty well, but you did get cars jumping around a lot. That's something I do remember. So it was very difficult to predict where you would end up and where they would end up, and whether or not somebody would warp into your car basically and cause all sorts of mayhem. As I said, Daytona USA 2001 already wasn't a very easy to drive game. Yeah. So it's kind of the bastard child of the series. But that's where it all started for me.
Yep, well, that's interesting. I guess I'll take it from here then. And fling off with my first experience. So basically, mine was actually on the Nintendo DS, playing Mario Kart DS online. And that was my first experience playing it online completely. And it just blew my mind, basically, that this little handheld was capable of playing games online. And the way Mario Kart DS worked was it was some epic 4-player races in total. So there's only 4 people per race. But what was really interesting about it was, before every race, you could show like a user-drawn like icon. And I always remember how some people had these really well detailed things, and mine was like a crappy sun or something like that. And
Nintendo love doing stuff like that, like
yeah, they really do.
With the Wii U and the Miiverse and everything. They love it when people can draw their own stuff and share it.
And it was really cool at the time. Like, it was such a small detail, but even today, sometimes I think about it and I'm like, the Switch has a touchscreen. It would be cool if we could design our own icons again, because it was something that really stood out when you get matched with people, because you would look at it and if they had a really, really well detailed icon, you knew that they took the game very seriously. So I was like, I'm probably going to get beat here. And the actual racing experience was remarkably smooth from what I remember. Considering it was on a handheld and the Wi-Fi card at the time wouldn't have been anything special. And it was some great racing online, even with 4 players. I mean, inevitably, there was a technique called snaking that became very popular on Mario Kart DS, where you would power up your drift from one side to the other and basically just completely annihilate other players because of the speed gains. And that kind of ruined the experience, but at the same time, because it was my inaugural debut on online racing, it didn't annoy me as much back then, because it was the novel concept of playing other players from across the world.
Well, the Mario...
And yeah, it was...
Sorry.
No, on you go.
I was going to say, the Mario Kart pros would say that you are wrong and bad if you don't, try the snake and just do it like the rest of them do.
Oh, of course, Mario Kart's serious business. You shouldn't be having fun. You should be trying to win the races. Yeah, it was really cool. And then, in terms of console gaming, my first racing experience was, you're probably going to punch me for this, Sega Rally Revo again. Not to bring it up 2 podcasts in a row, but I hadn't really played many online games before I got my PlayStation 3, and that was one of the games that came with it at the time. And that was actually very similar to how you described Daytona. It was basically like a group of 30 or 20 people who always raced online. So it was great because there was a little community there, and we were all very good friends by the end of racing with each other. And it was just funny because the text chat was like the main way of communicating on the game, but I had this horrendous filter that was so picky. If you tried to say congratulations, it would censor the first 3 letters.
What expletive is in congratulations? I don't...
Con, apparently.
Con? What? That's not a bad word.
But oh yeah, I always vaguely remember a Kotaku article from around the time the game came out, like lambasting the filter. But I think it's been lost to the waves of internet time, because I've never been able to find it again. But it was just so ridiculously picky. So you'd be having a great conversation, and then it would look like you just decided to swear at the guy. That was you had a target on your back.
And all you were trying to say was congratulations. That's absolutely hilarious. I don't think I ever played that game online, because basically what ended up happening is I played Daytona 2001, and then where I lived, because America is in some places so incredibly backwards, we didn't get broadband internet until about 2009, which is ridiculous because I assume that most people probably had it around 05 or 06.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we get it then, and at that point Forza 3 had just come out. And for a while I was trying to play Forza 3 with my friend on our dial-up. So it wasn't dial-up until then. Basically what we had between about like 2004, let's say, and 2009, what we had was one-way high-speed internet, which is basically like, it's one-way broadband, so downloads were very quick, but uploads were incredibly slow.
Yeah.
So what we realized we could do is, if we were in races with a small enough group of players, the lag wouldn't be too bad, and our infrastructures could handle it, because my friend and I who played these games lived right down the street from each other, and we were using the same internet. So if there was any more than, like, say, 4 other people in the race, we had to back out of that lobby. And it was really frustrating but also hilarious because we'd chance it sometimes, like, oh, this race is about to start. Can we do it? I think we can do it. And then we go on, there'd be like 10 cars, and then it'd just be absolute mayhem, and people would be swearing at us. So that was pretty much, before Forza 3, I also played some PGR 3 online that way. But it was very limited. I couldn't do it very often because of the nature of our internet. And then 2009 rolls around, we actually get true broadband, and it unlocked Forza 3 and the proper internet to play that game online, unlocked a world of just possibilities and fun for me that I never expected. I made a couple friends, people I don't talk to anymore, probably like a year after that game came out, but for the time I was playing it, I met people, we raced online together, we kind of had our little crew, we shared like tuning setups and stuff, we talked about these things, and it was a great community. It was the kind of thing that like is like the online gaming ideal that I've never really experienced elsewhere, but I did with Forza 3, and it was a blast.
I think that is one of the reasons why certain games will stick in our online racing history minds. It's that sense of community that you got from driving with familiar faces or hosting kind of close lobbies. I mean, it didn't sound as if you had much of a choice in terms of how many drivers could be in yours, but
right.
Like, it's experiences like that stick out more than the kind of general racing ones, I think.
Yeah, it's more about what happens off the track, and I feel like, for me, that's what it comes back to a lot when I talk about racing games, is that, the gameplay experience is great. No one's going to argue about the importance of physics or the proper frame rate or all of that, but for me, it's also connecting to other people that enjoy what you enjoy and being able to talk about it, whether it's having a dedicated online experience like that or like growing up, going to GT Planet and having conversations with people. It's central to any genre that you enjoy, whether it's racing or anything else. And Forza 3 was the first time where I was actually able to experience that in the game, and it was great. I mean, after that, I played some PGR 4 online. My friend and I loved the British Bulldog event in that game, where it was just basically tag, but it was tag across the entire city, like, because PGR 4 had something like 4 or 5 cities in it, and you could basically play tag around the entire open world of a city in that game.
Sounds fantastic.
It was so much fun. Oh my god, we would go around like Macau, which was an amazing city that game had, and just launch ourselves off of, because there are ridiculous cliffs and jumps in that place, in real life. And I remember one time I was coming out of a tunnel that kind of like, best way to describe it would be like it was this like main road in Macau, this main highway, and then for whatever reason the middle of it just dips down into this brief tunnel, and like so you have like a very sharp drop down, and then like it's kind of like below the surface, and then there's another equally sharp jump back up onto a main road that you were previously driving on. And what happened was I was in something very fast, and my friend was in a Mercedes CLK GTR, which, if you know that car, has its front end is basically a ramp. And what happened was he showed up at the going up part of that tunnel. He showed up at just the proper angle, to the point where when I hit the top of that slant, of that gradient, his car's, the front of it, perfectly lined up with it, and he launched me into the air, and I don't think I ever came down.
Wow. That is incredible.
And this was all during a game of tag. It was just a blast, and a lot of the Xbox games at that point really prioritized online play. I think they beat Sony to the punch on that, and we had a blast playing those games.
It does sound like great fun. Funnily enough, it reminds me of another driving game. It wasn't necessarily about racing, but GTI Club Plus. Yes. By Konami. Mm-hmm. And yeah, just the bomb tag in that game was phenomenal, and that was another really great online experience that had this really funny integration with the PlayStation Eye. So you could basically set up like 4 predetermined photos. It was like when you overtake someone, you have a daft photo. When you get overtaken, you could have a stupid photo. When you pass the bomb, you get the idea.
Yeah.
And you would always find people online who were just like pushing the boundaries of what was acceptable, and it was just such a laugh. It was a great little game, and it's one of those little experiences I think's missing from this generation. That might have left behind just a silly fun driving game that is about mini games rather than actually the kind of uber clean racing that we all love as well.
When GTI Club Plus showed up on the PlayStation Network, I was astounded because I had never heard of that game before, and I've been following racing games my entire life, and when there's especially an arcade racer that I haven't heard of before, I lose it. So, one day I'm on the PSN and I see this game and I'm like, what the hell is this? And it's developed by Konami? Like, I have no idea. So, I was playing it and I was like, this is very strange. This is a very weird game. But it was fun, and it was only after that I discovered that GTI Club came out in the 90s and was Konami's arcade racer, and you can go on YouTube and watch old clips of it. It looks absolutely astonishing. It looks like, a goofier version of Rage Racer, but with, small French and Italian hatchbacks and stuff. And the handling is just absolutely ridiculous. Yeah. I don't think I ever did any online racing on it, but it's a very unique game, and you've made me really want to see if I can go back on the PlayStation Network and see if I can download it. I don't think I can, because I'm sure those licenses have run out for Konami.
Yeah, unfortunately. But, we could use some unscrupulous methods of you getting a hold of somebody who has the game, so you can download it. I wonder if something like that could happen. But
wait, did they have a?
We'll have to look into
that.
Did
they have a box copy for that? Or you're talking about other unscrupulous methods? Okay, we'll just move on then. Anyway, so GTI Club was definitely a lot of fun. I would love for an experience like that again.
Oh, definitely.
And it actually goes off of what we were talking about last week with Burnout, or 2 weeks ago with Burnout Paradise possibly getting a remaster, which sadly we still have heard nothing about, which kind of is a little worrying. But that game came out at a time where I didn't quite... It was like a couple months before I got that improved internet service, so I couldn't play it online properly, and that was really difficult, because most of the draw with that game is the online play, and it had a fantastic gameplay experience online, and I was never really able to get into it.
Oh, that's a shame. One of the best parts of the game as well.
Yeah, they put a lot of work into it for sure. So, yeah, that's a pretty good roundup, I think, of our histories, and I guess if we just wanted to touch on the stuff that we play online now, for me, really, it's just GT Sport. I've been putting a lot of time into playing GT Sport online, and I didn't think that I would enjoy the sport mode as much as I have, but I found that when you have a very simple, a very simple format for the lobby, and it's like you have 3 different races every day. They're always, within 20 minutes or 15 minutes of each other, so you can easily jump in. You never have to worry about not getting a deep enough lobby, because that's something that I constantly ran into with Forza, is that, like, there are times where I want to go on, and you'd only have 3 or 4 people in these ranked lobbies, and it wouldn't work. So that's not something that you have an issue with in GT Sport, and yeah, I do want to see a little bit more variation with the events. Like, I was talking to my friend about, like, multi-class racing would be great. Endurance racing that really made you more prioritize better use of the fuel mapping and tire changes and stuff like that would be preferred, but that's something that they can always add going forward down the line.
Yeah, I think Polyphony's idea seems to be, over time, events will become more difficult, because if you compare it to what we have now to what we had in the first few weeks, there's definitely been an increase in events that prioritise either fuel or tyres. You very rarely get a race that makes you manage both.
Yeah.
But I think GT Sport is also my de facto racing platform, purely because of how easy it is to use, like you were saying. I mean, the only other racing game that I really play online is Mario Kart 8, funnily enough. And the reason I love that is because it is so simple to just jump into a race.
Yep.
And it's something that sim racing games in particular seem apprehensive to adapt. Just some sort of quick way of getting into a match. And I was happy to see in this year's Forza, 2017's Forza, that they have these events that you can just kind of drop into and race, but because it isn't regulated, it's an absolute crapshoot, basically. But like GT Sport is pretty much the perfect storm for what it was going to take to get me into online racing. It's simple, it's fast, and there's some regulatory stuff in there so that you've got your sportsmanship rating, your driver rating, and I know it isn't perfect, But it makes such a difference. If you play any other racing game, you instantly see the type of community that GT Sport has compared to its competitors.
Yeah, and I think they've really stumbled. I don't want to say stumbled. They deliberately did it. They found the good formula for this, and Gran Turismo has had a weird path to online racing. You know, we never really got the GT4 online that was supposed to kind of usher in the online racing experience for that franchise. They got it in Asia, but we didn't get it in other parts of the world. So most of us, I think, our first experiences with Gran Turismo Online came from GT5 Prologue, which was as bare bones an experience as you can imagine, because it did have those, like couple different races every day, but there was no. That game was more limited than GT Sport. I think what a lot of people call GT Sport kind of like a GT7 Prologue, they forget exactly how small Prologue was.
Yeah,
you didn't have many cars. There was nothing in the way of endurance racing and managing tires and fuel. Like, it was a really limited experience. And also the netcode wasn't fantastic, and PlayStation Network back then was just absolutely a mess.
Oh, yeah.
So, but it was a way to get into it. And I think with GT5 and GT6, surprisingly, I feel like they gave us a ton of options for for the online experience, both on and off the track, that no one was really expecting. You know, the ability to upload certain cars so other people can drive, and kind of make your space in the game and have a B-Spec driver online, and they actually did it properly, and it worked very well. But I think GT Sport's the first time they did it in such a way that it was easy to just jump into and have fun with.
Yeah.
And as much as I enjoy sport mode, the other thing I'll say is that the most fun I've had online is going online with two of my friends who I actually live with. So it's great that we have these races, and then we're screaming at each other from across the apartment.
Yeah.
But going online, and we'll do these 30-minute, 40-minute endurance races, fuel on, tires on. We'll do Group 3, we'll do Group 1, Group 4, and it's a blast. You know, not really knowing how the stints are going to shake up, not really knowing who's on what map or what tires they're using. It's the type of racing I love because it doesn't just prioritize out-and-out speed and fastest laps. It prioritizes consistency and strategy. And for me, that is everything I look for in racing online. A short endurance race where those factors still come into play. There's nothing more fun than that for me.
Yeah, and it's good that even for as simple as GT Sport is, it's still got a plethora of options. Not quite the Pandora's box of GT5 that had just so many elements. It was like built upon a Facebook Mini, essentially, and they really did give you as many options as they possibly could. Like you said, hosting the cars and stuff. And although Sport streamlines a lot of those aspects, it's hard to deny the whole online experience is so seamless that I feel silly for even doubting that Polyphony would be able to pull off what they have done.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's hard to predict. Anytime you see a developer's like, we're going to completely upend our model and our established, way of doing things, you always get a little hesitant. But they've done it. They've done it properly. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
And I should say that before GT Sport, also had a lot of fun. Drive Club. I think Drive Club. One day we'll talk about Drive Club, and I will make everyone feel bad if they didn't play it from the beginning, because it's such a great game that I don't think got a fair shot.
Drive Club could be a topic in itself between the two of us, I think. We've got a lot to say on it, and just to briefly bring it back to online racing, I love the fact that you could party up like the way you can do in most first-person shooters.
Absolutely.
I think that's something that I would love in Gran Turismo Sport. I know why they don't do it for the sport stuff, but even just travelling as a party into other lobbies and stuff would be cool, much like Drive Club allowed.
Unranked sport races would be great. If they did that and we could party up, it would really be, I think, the last thing that game needs. Because Drive Club launched and obviously had issues, definitely. It's a multiplayer-focused game where the multiplayer wasn't functioning for a good month or something. That's going to be a problem, not denying that at all. But once they got it in stride, once they fixed those problems, it was a sublime experience. And I had never, I don't know, I mean, there was Forza Horizon, there was The Crew, there were other arcade racers, and the arcade racers that prioritized online, but none that were that, in my opinion, none that were that solid and that much fun to drive. None with that core gameplay experience that any game needs, regardless of whether you're doing most of your racing against other people or against the AI.
Yep.
And Drive Club was just a revelation. Being able to do those club events, and then also like, the challenges and the auto log style system that they had was great. And I hope that whatever Evolution Studios does next with Onrush, they're now Codemasters, but I hope that they carry that on.
Yeah, I think it says a lot when there's so many people who are interested in Onrush purely because of the team behind Drive Club. And I think that just shows how much of a good job they did. And although it didn't end quite as well as I'm sure they would have hoped, I think Drive Club will remain for many the definitive racing experience on PlayStation 4 by the end of its life cycle, purely because of just how well it nailed all its aspects and the end up. And the only threat to that throne, of course, will be GT Sport and how that develops from here, because it's got a fantastic base to work with, and I'm really intrigued to see what the future holds, especially online for GT.
Yeah, and I guess the last thing that I wanted to talk about as we kind of run to closing minutes of this show is there's so much focus on esports today, and one of the first things we knew about Gran Turismo Sport was that it would have this kind of FIA system that they still haven't really rolled out yet. But I don't know. Have you always, or have you ever been really concerned with the whole esports thing? Because it's something that, like, it doesn't get me excited. I find it kind of hard to relate to, and although I appreciate people who can go online and compete at that high level, never something I aspired to do, but it is nevertheless very popular, which is why in the same year that we heard about Gran Turismo getting an esports, application in it, Forza announced the racing championship, and Project Cars had their esports thing, and every game now.
I think I've got a very love-hate relationship with esports. I mean, initially, right up until about even last year, I just didn't really see the point in it. It didn't interest me. The actual appeal to esports from outsiders just isn't really there for most games, and all the barriers to getting it in that format and actually raising prize money just seemed like it was a waste of resources. But I actually started watching the Rocket League Championship Series. Now, I think Rocket League's the exception to the rule purely because of how much of a masterstroke it is. You're basically combining the fundamentals of real sport with cars, so people can instantly know what's happening, and it's exciting, and it's 5-minute matches. And I will be totally honest, I watched every single weekend of competition right up until the final last year. The first time that I'd ever watched any esports, because it was that good.
Wow.
Now, the reason I pointed out esports as the exception to the rule in my case is that if you look at something on the other side of the spectrum, like Overwatch League, where this is for Overwatch players and as a spectator sport, it isn't, in my opinion. Anyway, I feel as if racing kind of falls in between those two extremes, where most people think real racing is boring, so the idea of watching an hour and a half of digital racing just isn't going to appeal to a lot of people.
Yeah, I understand that. And I think racing, the genre is in a weird place when it comes to esports as well, because I think for something to be successful from an esports standpoint, it needs to be something that you can't possibly do in real life. It needs to be its own thing. And so, because what we're looking for in sport, in any sort of competition, I think, is that authenticity, that whatever is being done is like something that only the most elite players or group of people can do. And when you see people flying around in Rocket League championship matches and stuff, never touching the ground, it's astonishing if you've ever played that game or tried to play it for a couple hours and given up, because it's, I mean, I've played the game since it came out and I still can't fly properly. So it really is special when you see that. But I think when it comes to racing games, it just always ends up being this thing is like, well, why wouldn't I just watch real racing?
Exactly.
Or why would, it's so close. It's so strange because I think more than any other genre, if we really try and think about it, it is the most like the thing it's trying to emulate in terms of any sports genre. When you play a football game, you're using a controller, you're not using your feet, and you're not using, when you play basketball, you're not actually shooting anything. But it sounds obvious when I put it that way, but at the same time, I think it's something to be aware of, that like when people have their sim rigs and they have their Thrustmasters or their Logitech G29s or whatever, and they're all set to go, and they make their little makeshift cockpit, like that is pretty close in terms of a digital experience, pretty close to what you can experience in the real life. You're obviously not moving, but you're still playing with those same interfaces.
Yeah.
And I think for that reason, it actually harms the ability for esports to catch on with racing, because why wouldn't you just go out and do it? I think is probably the layman's, the regular person's interpretation of that.
Yep. I mean, it's not a popular answer, but I do agree. I feel like an esport shouldn't necessarily be a simulation of something that already exists, because the sense of disbelief just disappears, really. And then it's the complexity of esports that also kills it in various ways. Like, Rocket League is simple as it gets, so even regular spectators can understand it. And the thing is, a lot of regular spectators can understand racing esports as well, but like you said, it's more of a case of, why would I watch this? And even Polyphony may have acknowledged that, in the sense that any pre-release events or like 2-lap races or 3-lap races, that they weren't pushing it to the real racing standards, because whilst it's good for the competitors, I just don't see the excitement value of watching an endurance race in a game like Gran Turismo, and that is a shame, because there's a lot riding on this FIA sponsorship and all that stuff, but I just don't think the general public is going to find it that exciting when it does actually try and make its push as a spectator sport.
It worries me when Kaz mentions, that he doesn't think that the future of racing is in actual racing of cars in the real world. He thinks it's in games, because whether we left with as automotive enthusiasts, as racing enthusiasts, racing is an expensive sport. It's a sport that you really have to commit to for a fan base that honestly worldwide is not anywhere near what you get from other established sports. So it's always been weird. It's always been kind of impenetrable for the average person. And I think it's only natural that it becomes kind of impenetrable in terms of esports as well. But I am waiting for that one racing game where I watch those like top level competitions and those top tier competitions. I think it also kind of has come back to bite Polyphony and these other developers, in as much as like they spent so much time validating esports as a way to make gamers into real racing drivers, that they've shot themselves in the foot now for trying to make the gaming itself, the digital experience, as interesting as the real life competitive experience of actual racing.
It's almost like a reverse step.
Yeah, it's they're trying to flip it around and now make this the exciting part of the spectrum, where like before it was about GT Academy was just about like, oh, Gran Turismo is a helpful stepping stone to learning how to do these things in the real world, but that's what it's good for. The racing in the game is not inherently interesting as much as where it's going to lead these young men and women in the future. But
yep,
that is racing. That's always the way it's been.
Exactly. And just a small side point before we wrap up, like, there's a mentality referred to over here as the your da mentality, which is basically like anything new that involves the digital age is automatically slammed down. So like, if Formula 1 make a post about their esports series, you'll bet that there'll be some 44-year-old from Sussex or something responding, saying like, this isn't real racing, get this kid on the track and stuff. And like, that is although it's funny, it's a real mentality, like, that a lot of people are just so apprehensive about accepting esports as a medium in general. And obviously the biggest champions of are the guys who are the best at the games, unsurprisingly, because there's a real opportunity for them there. But in terms of, I don't think that it'll ever get that mainstream appeal. But if they even manage to capture like 15% of the gamer audience, then I guess it's a successful venture.
I mean, it seems like at this point they have to capture people like us. They have to capture people who already play these games and who already care, but don't so much see the value in the esports side of things. And that might be the main, struggle going forward.
Yeah, agreed.
Right, so that's pretty much our second show in the bag. Before we wrap up, I just wanted us to quickly, since we're relatively unknowns and we have maybe 5 listeners at this point, just say who we are and what we do. So, again, I'm Adam Ismail. You can find me contributing to GT Planet regularly, and as well as if you are into technology, I write for a website called Tom's Guide, and Mobile World Congress is coming up soon, and I'm going to be over in Barcelona testing all sorts of crazy phones. So that's what I do. My Twitter handle is Pioneer Spine, which is spelled the way you would think, although a lot of people ask me if it's Pioneer's Pine or Pioneer Spine. Yeah. And I mean, if it helps you to prefer it to pronounce it as Pioneer's Pine, then by all means go for it.
And you can find me on Twitter at Brendwings. It's the first part of my name, really, then Wings at the end. And you can also find some of my content over at gtplanet.net. Do quite a lot of news coverage over there, the occasional op-ed piece as well, but I usually write quite a lot of stupid tweets, so if you're going to follow me, that's just a disclaimer.
Yeah, if you want to see me screaming into the void about arcade racing games that don't get enough love anymore, then you'll want to follow both of us, really.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what we specialize in. So, alright, thanks everyone, and we will see you in 2 weeks.
Cheers everyone, thanks.